Warriors, it is my honor today to bring to you two wonderful, fabulous allies in the movement to protect children, Tammy Toney-Butler and Rick Lane. And I think today I want each of them to introduce themselves because each of them have a fantastic background, and you are going to learn so much from both of them today as we sit here and discuss and help you hear what you don't hear in mainstream media and what you're not being told. And we need all of you. We cannot do this alone to protect our children online and in real time. Community creates change. So welcome Tammy and Rick to the Warriors.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
I want to start with you, Tammy. Please share with our audience who you are.
I am Tammy Toney-Butler. I am a sexual assault nurse examiner, forensic examiner. I was an ER nurse for over 30 years. I am a subject matter expert on human trafficking. I published author, and I also have lived experience as a survivor of sex trafficking. I work with survivors on my ranch on their journeys to heal. I work with adults and their children and adults and adolescent survivors of human trafficking all over the country.
Thank you, Tammy. Rick, let's hear from you.
My name's Rick Lane. I'm CEO of Iggy Ventures, but for working on these types of issues, I volunteer my time. But my background is for 30 plus years. I've been involved in every technology policy piece of legislation going through Capitol Hill, most of the states and internationally. From my time working on Capitol Hill to working at a major law firm, to being the first director of e-commerce and internet technology for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, then to News Corp and 21st Century Fox as their senior vice president. So I'm happy to be here, Lynn, and happy to answer any questions.
And everybody, Tammy and Rick are being very shy actually about themselves because we could sit here for hours and rattle off their credits. Everything Rick's involved with Horton's Kids, correct, Rick, in Washington, a nonprofit at-risk youth to empower them in educational purposes and to instill confidence in them. And Tammy has so much going on. It just exhausts me. She is a one-woman warrior and I admire her. She is a true mentor of mine. Let's start with, why are we here? We are here to talk about the Earn It Act. Let's go. Tammy, begin.
The Earn It Act is such a vital piece of legislation, especially on the heels of the national tragedy that just happened here and the tragedy in New York, in Buffalo. And my heart goes out to those families, to the law enforcement, to the government officials, to everyone navigating that difficult space. When I started working in anti-trafficking work, and I wrote an article published in the National Library of Medicine on human trafficking, I realized through my research that I was actually a victim of human trafficking. And it was that knowledge that put me on a path to change so many things with this population and how we recognize them and serve them. And that led into this work on this key vital piece of legislation. And the Earn It Act is to stop the online sexual exploitation or the facilitation of it with children and vulnerable adults, but specifically it renames child pornography to CSAM, or child sexual abuse material, in federal statute. It provides a pathway of justice for survivors to seek civil recourse, but to empower them to have a pathway to get this egregious content taken down that was put up without their consent. Technology is raising a generation. It is raising a generation, and there's no borders. It's a borderless kind of a virtual Wild West. And this legislation, this piece, HR 6544 and S3538, is going to put safeguards and kind of boundaries in place, establish a best practices commission, and to hold these technologies accountable. This is not a technology issue. It is a public policy issue, like putting seatbelts in a car. The internet is harming our children. It's harming so many individuals. And it's just virtually, it's just out there and there's no stopping it. And with metaverse and Web 3.0, which Rick is going to talk about coming, we really have to put safeguards in place. And then I go to the argument of why do we care? Well, we care because we are mass producing victims on a scale that we cannot keep up with. The public health impacts of this are enormous. It is contributing downstream to our adolescent suicide rates, our emergency department visits of our adolescents, our mental health crises that we find ourselves in today. And it is costing child maltreatment, which is what child sexual abuse is. Child rape is what I call it. I know because I lived it. That is, costing our economy $428 billion a year annually. And then the downstream effects of that, there's studies out now that are literally showing that child sexual assault in women is contributing downstream to early stroke, heart attacks in these women, which is affecting our Medicaid, our Medicare costs. And that translates into impacts to us as taxpayers as well, because it's contributing to our $5.6 trillion expected healthcare expenditures by 2028. Add in where the internet is expected to go, artificial intelligence expected to explode by 2025. We really have to look at the impacts of this. And even from a national security perspective, we are creating platforms of hate by not setting safeguards and standards to stop or screen or do what we can to get some of this egregious content. And we're saying it's okay. It's okay to live stream sexual abuse material, raping of children. And we have to stop that. And the Earn It Act provides a tool in our tool chest. It's a splinter and a piece of plywood of the problem. But if you want to combat human trafficking, you have to start with the Earn It Act because it gets to the root cause and affects directly supply and demand.
Thank you, Tammy. And thank you for sharing also with our audience your personal story. It's powerful, it resonates, and we always thank you. Before we get to you, Rick, because I have a lot of questions for our tech policy expert, which is the way I always refer to you, Rick. I have to say, sitting here in the middle of New York City, I am a bit up in arms because the media today, online and, on television, cable, all they're talking about is our governor, Kathy Hochul, going after the, social media companies, and they have to be shut down. And we have to, talk to these CEOs. And isn't this horrific? And where have they been about the rape of our children, on all of these platforms? They've been zero. Okay. But today they're all over it about this hate and about this. So we've got to keep an eye on that. But it is very, very disturbing, but we're going to keep after them and talk about it and, find ways to just keep going on about all of this until they understand about this child sexual abuse material on every single platform that all of us use and all of our, every platform our kids use. Rick, let's get to you. Tell us about Earn It Act as far as, first of all, what does Earn It Act mean? Give us some tech stuff about this online so the audience can really understand what this is. And then we're going to get into how the audience, how the public can help us with Earn It Act. But speak to us, Rick, also about what's coming up. Tammy mentioned it, Web 3.0, metaverses, so much.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I think what people don't realize is that there was legislation passed in 1996 as part of the Telecommunications Act that provided very broad liability protections for the platforms, that basically they could not be held accountable for what their users posted. And that has been sort of the state of law until now. And what this legislation is about saying that we're not going to try to regulate content, we're going to regulate the conduct of these platforms that are not doing enough to prohibit and stop CSAM from being transmitted across their networks and their platforms. And that's critical. One of the things that you'll hear from our friends on the other side is that, well, CSAM is already illegal. That's already, a crime. And that is actually true. It is already a crime. But then what they say is, don't go after the platforms that are distributing it, go after the individuals that are posting it. Well, I always found that very interesting because in copyright law, for example, if I worked for Fox, we had a lot of movies that were legally streamed. The movies themselves is not illegal content. The content is legal. It's the retransmission of that content that is the crime that is committed. It also has civil penalties and criminal penalties. But in the world of CSAM, they're saying, wait, if a platform is retransmitting and helping transmit CSAM, they can't be held accountable. So what we have is a situation where platforms have more liability for streaming a Fox or Disney movie than for streaming CSAM and live CSAM or recorded CSAM. That the individuals who are harmed by that streaming or by those pictures have no legal rights themselves to go after the platforms that are engaged in this. And that's what the Earn It Act is all about. It's about providing legal recourse for the survivors or the parents of the children who have been harmed, the ability to go after these websites that are knowingly engaged in facilitating CSAM transmissions. And the other key piece of this is that CSAM is illegal. So it's not even like a movie, which is legal content. The content itself is illegal. So there's no First Amendment right here. You don't have a First Amendment right to stream or to post or to facilitate the transmission of CSAM. And that's the core of this legislation. That's what we're trying to change. That the websites themselves, the platforms like Google and Reddit and Meta and Facebook and Instagram, and go down the list of these platforms, must have in place mechanisms, their conduct must ensure that they're doing everything in their power to help stop the transmission of these horrible, horrible images. And Lynn, I want to just emphasize a point that you made about what's happening in Buffalo. First of all, our heart goes out to all the people up there. My sister-in-law and niece had a shooting in LA that they were just in this weekend, the same day as the Buffalo. The pictures of them cowering as someone is shooting inside a shopping market is terrifying. So we had this, what was happening in Buffalo was happening really in my own family on the same day. But what I always found fascinating is that you do have this reaction from elected officials on the social networking sites that we need to do more. This live streaming is horrible. And to your point, children are being raped, live streamed every day. There are more children harmed every day than are shot. You think about it, what's happening in the schools. There are more children harmed mentally and physically, and the rate of child suicides is through the roof. And part of that is because of what's happening online. Yet, where is the outrage? Why aren't we having the same type of press conferences that we're going to see going after these social networking sites on a horrible incident, and again, that they should be held accountable for and helping to facilitate. But at the same time, every single day, thousands of children are being hurt in schools, online, through these same platforms that somehow now are seen to be horrible platforms, because of what happened in Buffalo. This has been going on for years, and people like Tammy and Lynn, yourself, have been making this argument and screaming from the rooftops, and no one's hearing. Hopefully, people will finally realize that these sites need to be held accountable for their conduct and not just the content that people are posting.
Well, I think with the three of us alone, we're making tremendous strides with the public. Now, I'm going to ask a couple of questions the public is always asking me. And you can answer, not answer. Here's the number one question I get all the time, because every day I'm preaching about CSAM, safety filters, know what your kids are doing online. The parents, grandparents, concerned family members, they seem to be in the dark. And we don't blame them. We're not judging because everything's overwhelming, right? So much has been going on, especially in the last few years. Why is this allowed to happen? I know this is kind of a loaded question. I know I always have my same answer that I say. The people always say to me, how can this be? Why is this allowed? Does anybody want to answer this? Thoughts on this?
I think, oh, go ahead, Tammy.
Go ahead, Rick, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think some of it is sort of the child in the well syndrome. And what I mean by that, when the child falls into a well, the media goes around and they're constantly, they have the cameras there, all the people are there, everyone's trying to focus on this child in the well because it's sad. But you can comprehend that because it's one child. But when we're talking about thousands of children, right, that are being abused, and it's not just here in the United States, but the streaming is happening, getting young children out of the Philippines or in other Asian countries like Thailand, where the people are paying to watch the actual raping of these children internationally. But I think it's become so overwhelming that they just can't handle and they can't process it. They don't want to think about it. It's so much easier to focus on the one child in the well than the thousands of children who are being abused and whose pictures are ending up on these sites like Reddit and other sites that they just can't figure out what can we do to stop it. And they just tend to ignore it because if they don't see it, they don't talk about it, then it's not happening.
And I'll piggyback off of that. Every time I speak on human trafficking all over the country or internationally, people come up to you and they're so overwhelmed at what they just heard. Right. Because we live in a bubble. We live in a bubble because so many of us are just trying to make it and feed our families and keep them safe. And we put this bubble around the things that we do. And we believe that as parents that we're doing that we're doing it, that we're making it because we're struggling. Either we're living paycheck to paycheck, or either we're just overwhelmed with our own trauma, our own past experiences, and we're just trying to parent through survival mode, or we just have no idea where to start. It's such a huge issue. And I think that's where the Earn It Act comes in. It is the most vital piece of legislation for us to pass to give us the tools that we need, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the tools that they need to halt the mass production of these victims. And it is a splinter and a piece of plywood of the problem, but it is a place to start. We think that we are protecting our children, but what you're doing is handing them a cell phone or a tablet at age 10 or 9, which is the standard age if you look at the Pew Research studies and things that are out, or the Thorn studies. And we are giving them this electronic device and saying, hi, honey, here you go to bed, see ya. And we just put the predator in their bedroom. So we can try to protect them all we want. It doesn't matter if we're rich, it doesn't matter if we're poor, it doesn't matter if you're white, it doesn't matter if you're black. It does not matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. This is an issue that affects everyone. You're talking about controllers, traffickers, predators, who this is their commodity. The trading in CSAM, this child sexual abuse material, is quite profitable. You bring in cryptocurrencies, you bring in Bitcoin, you put this in the dark web, let alone all that's on the open web. It is a creative funding stream that organized crime groups and others can use to create breeding grounds of hate. And social media is knowingly facilitating openly on their platforms breeding grounds of hate or exploitation or abuse. And it is this mere omnipresence, the fact that the digital footprint is permanent, that you cannot pull this down, find a live human being to speak to, and regain back your dignity. The abuser is allowed to exploit you or hurt you over and over again. And you feel like you're always tied to them because of the fact that the cell phone or electronic device is such a part of our culture. Again, social media is raising a generation of children technology, especially with our opioid orphans, those that are being raised by the grandparents. And so if you don't know where to start, trust me, I know the way. Passing the Earn It Act is the way. I have a PSA video that's out with embedded links. Follow those links and send letters to Congress. Speak to them. Let them know that you've had enough. Because I was just in Congress all month on Capitol Hill. I met with about 80 individuals on the Hill, different members of the aisle. And a lot of them keep talking about how there's so many things going on in this moment that they need to focus on. But they all yet in the same breath say they want to attack human trafficking. Well, if you want to stop human trafficking and you want to act instead of just talking, then let's get this, introduce this Congress and vote on it and stop the mass production of child victims and these platforms of hate. Much like when you would, we used to grow up in the days to where we would have parties, like high school parties. Remember that? Parents would buy, alcohol and kegs and all these things, right? And you would do this and you didn't realize, you thought you were helping, bringing all these children together. Well, then it went into where these children were leaving these parties and they were drinking and driving and they were killing innocent individuals. When they started suing the parents and holding them accountable, these things stopped happening. These mass parties and things that we had to rein in. This is just another moment in time that we have to rein in some of these issues that are affecting us socially, economically. And we have to say we've had enough, that we've had enough with technology companies believing that they can set their own standards, police themselves. The pharmaceutical company couldn't do it. The tobacco industry could not do it, and they cannot do it. We have to have an independent body, much like the Earn It Act talks about forming this best practices commission to set the standards, to hold them accountable and provide a platform for us to be able to get this content taken down and to stop the open raping of children on their platforms, which is occurring. And the US is the #1 consumer of this content. And we need to put that out there. What is that saying about us as a nation? What is that saying about us as a nation?
I mean, we all have a moral obligation, I'm coming to say in the last couple of weeks, that we're all taxpayers. These are all of the children belong to all of us. This is the way I'm thinking about it now, that we are parents to all of these children being abused and raped. And I also think we have to use strong language, because that makes people don't have any kind of attention span today. But when you use child rape, they sit up and they listen. Or if you use, the United States is the biggest consumer, they say, what, really? Tammy, I'm glad you brought up about money, because I always go to money. Money is the bottom line of everything. And when you can make money, which is why right now I'm fighting so hard right here in New York State for against the full decriminalization of the sex trade, because the bottom line is supply and demand. In order to fill that demand, more people will be trafficked. We have the studies, we have the reports, we know what it is. Media won't talk about it. There's a very well-funded, pro-sex trade here in New York. And there I go to Albany, marching in, with my Warriors t-shirt on. And we're up against a lot, but it's completely frightening because we've got this money against us. But on the other hand, so many people it is out in the open more, every day, I'm hearing more talk, human trafficking. So that's a good thing. It's almost like domestic violence. Remember years ago, we never really heard, could have been 40 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe, we didn't hear a lot. That was always, shoved to the back of the closet. And then that kind of became a thing, domestic violence. You'd hear about it more, you'd read about it more, see it more in the media. I kind of feel like we're edging towards that with trafficking. Now, Rick, I want to ask you about, because this is another question I get from the public. They do not understand human trafficking happens online. They always say the white van, the trucks. Okay, explain for the audience. Human trafficking happens online.
Absolutely. I mean, when we bought MySpace, News Corp bought MySpace in 2008, and I was working with the Federal Trade Commission on how to protect kids online. One of the things that we recommended is put the computer in an area of the house where everybody gathers, so you can watch where, the kids and being online and what they're looking at. You think about that, and now kids have their computers on their phones, right? Now they're everywhere. I have 3 devices that right here in my office that are all connected to the internet, right? And the kids are, very smart and able to utilize the technology. But the issue really is for parents is to understand that what is happening online in terms of trafficking is grooming. And that has happened throughout history, where you have somebody who gains the trust of a child, and over time starts breaking down barriers, and then all of a sudden they've been groomed, the child's been groomed to the point where they start becoming abused. This is not new. What is new is that it can happen from somebody 1,000 miles away. It's not the white van in your neighborhood. It's the person who's on the other end of a screen. The other thing that happens is that kids who are more vulnerable, kids who have doubts about their self-esteem, doubts about their sexuality, doubts about who they are, sometimes reach out to people who they see becoming friends. And the predators out there know this. They find these young people who are posting things on their site that show, my parents don't like me, my friends are horrible. And they just start saying really nice things to them and build that confidence. And all of a sudden you have these online incidences. Now, what also has occurred is you have people posing as young people, and they start getting pictures of other young people sent to them. And it starts, with, take a picture of you in your bathing suit, or do this or do that. And then it goes further and further because the comfort level gets more and more. And then what all of a sudden you have is these people now saying, well, if you don't send me more and more graphic pictures, and you hear this from the FBI, what happens is that if they don't send more graphic pictures, I'm going to expose you on your Instagram page. I'm going to post this on Facebook. I'm going to send these pictures to your parents. I'm going to send these pictures to your friends. So all of a sudden you have the choice as a 14-year-old child, that do I send more pictures, or do I get exposed and everyone's going to know about this in my school and my parents are going to know? And that, what 14-year-old, how hard that is to make for a 14-year-old to make that decision. And then what has happened, and this is one of the stories I've heard on our calls that we have on Fridays, is that they may go to their parents and say, look at it, I made this major mistake. I don't know what to do. So the parents go to the police, and the police tell the parents, well, you have a problem here because those pictures are CSAM. So your child now can be convicted of distributing sexual explicit pictures. So do you really want to go forward? Because now you're putting your child at legal risk. A child who has been vulnerable, has been duped by somebody, is now at risk. So now what do you do? So you have this parade of horribles, and the people who are exploiting these children know all of this.
Yes.
And they're taking advantage of it, which is why the Earn It Act, again, is so important, because it will help provide parents with a tool to go after sites that are helping facilitate this horrible act. And in the meantime, you still go after the predators. I was just watching a Net Choice event on why the Earn It Act is not needed. And their big argument is that it's not needed because we need to provide more resources to law enforcement, that there's a bill by Senator Wyden to increase the funding for the Justice Department to do all these great things. And they are great things, don't get me wrong. But Senator Wyden was the one person, one of the members of 2, who voted against the FOSTA-SESTA legislation that basically made the transmission and distribution of children online and sex trafficking and coerced, now they can be held accountable. So companies like Backpage.com can no longer make their $500 million a year in terms of trafficking children. And yet we're all supposed to follow Senator Wyden's lead, the person who voted against all that. So you have these forces that are out there, both here in Washington, D.C., as well around the country, as you're seeing in New York, where there's a lot of money at stake, but you also have people who know how to manipulate the system. And as Tammy said, the Earn It Act is a piece of that puzzle. More needs to be done, but we do need people to support this legislation and help get it enacted through both houses of Congress and on the president's desk.
Wow. And I just want to point out that, Rick, what you were talking about is the word sextortion. So we want the public to understand, what the terms are and learn from us. Because I always forget we're so immersed in all of this, but this is so new for a lot of people. And they want to know once I start talking to them. I think when both of you also start talking to the public, they want to know more about this. Tammy, I want to bring up something. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. It's also Foster Care National Awareness Month. We have all these months. It has to be every day, all these things. But anyway, if we can bring awareness a little more than other times, anything is good. This is a big one, though. I'm very concerned about, and Rick, I want you to get in on this one also. This normalization, when I've really been digging in the last 2 years, and you really look at it, the normalization of the sexualization of our children, in the media. I speak to a lot of parents. The girls just thinking, boys, it's normal. You exchange nude images now. Like, that's just part of life. I was very disappointed. There was a December 7th, 2021 report put out by U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. He called it a rare advisory. It was 53 pages. I call that a report. But anyway, it was called a rare advisory about the mental health of our youth. I'm very concerned that our youth just think all of these things are normal now. What do you say, Tammy, as a nurse? What do you think about all of this? How are we going to get at the kids? Well, obviously we have to educate parents, but how are we going to, make a stab at that and start changing this around?
What we have to realize is that the mental health crisis, the opioid crisis, all these things, they aren't independent of each other. They're actually intersections. And childhood trauma, childhood maltreatment, childhood sexual assault, that can lead you down a path, as even in my case, to where I was sexualized very early. And then I didn't have boundaries put in place. The people that were supposed to protect me did not. And that led me down a pathway to open myself up to being re-victimized again over and over. And I think that we have to realize that the things that like I did to comfort with the shame, the guilt, the fear, the regret, was I would seek comfort in alcohol. I would seek comfort in trying to find a way to go to sleep, and I would take sleeping aids. And others cope by using opioids, and it's fueling our opioid crisis. And then when we look at the co-occurring mental health crisis, and we realize that like 1 in 5 individuals never ever report that they were sexually assaulted. These kids, like Rick was talking about with the sextortion, a lot of them never tell anyone. And it's only when they're suicidal, they've been Baker acted or put on an involuntary hold, that their parents even find out, if at all, that that's really the root. So me and my work with Nurses United Against Human Trafficking is we are going to put standards of care in place in hospitals and clinics and everything around the country from a nursing perspective, to where we make sure that that this is on our radar. Because when we look at the CDC data, the 2019 data that came out, 13% of adolescents have a major depressive disorder. That was up 60% from 2007. And the emergency department visits by children and adolescents rose sharply for anxiety, mood disorders, and self-harm. We look at our 10 to 24-year-old suicide rates, how they rose up by like 60%. And then the U.S. Surgeon General put out a December public health advisory that said that this is a national emergency, that is a devastating mental health crisis. And is there a role that social media is playing in all of this? And I think that we have to realize that that it is creating an opportunity to individuals to reach these children, exploit them, harm them, bully them. So many things in place that we have to look at to really get a handle on this, because this is affecting our emergency rooms. It is overwhelming our already overburdened healthcare system post-COVID, or even in the middle of if it's, some people aren't saying that it is post-COVID, some are saying that we're still in it, but it's still overwhelming an already burdened system. You add in the economic component. The one tool that we have in our tool chest is to stop the technology facilitated coercive control, or this component, which is harming our children. I just came back from a group meeting of task force leaders on human trafficking and law enforcement leaders all over the state of Florida. Everybody was there. Ashley Moody's team, the Attorney General, different folks were there. These police officers were presenting their content. Their hands, boots on the ground. Almost every one of their cases has a technology component. Every single one has some type of social media or technology component. They are overwhelmed by the vast number of the egregious content. NetMec will tell you they had over like 21.5 or something million reports in, I think, 2021, and they had like 90 million images of child sexual abuse material. And we do need to call it for what it is. It is child rape. I am a forensic examiner. I know what happened to me. And how do you utter that to people? How do you tell them what happened, especially if your parents are or involved, or in my case, even my mother would have been considered to be my trafficker. And I don't fault my mom because she had her own trauma. She parented in survival mode. So we have to get a handle on adverse childhood experiences, the downstream effects. We have to simultaneously stop the mass production of victims, and also, some would argue, the mass production of more predators, because there was a study put out by the Federal Bureau of Prisons called the Butler study, Butner study. I think it came out in like 2008 or something, and it talked about the fact that technology and looking at this online child sexual abuse material is no longer doing it for these predators, these individuals, that they are seeking out live children to perpetrate these egregious violent acts upon. And each one of them had between like 12 to 15 to 19 victims. And that's the thing, is we have to realize that it is creating, the social media technology, the internet is creating a new typology of offending and offenders. That affects all of us. It goes to the heart of recidivism rates. It goes to the heart of all of these downstream things affecting our economy. Add in the coexisting crises of opioid addiction, our torch infections, our neonatal abstinence syndromes, all of look at our CDC congenital syphilis rates. All of this has downstream effects, and you can trace it back to the root cause, which is childhood maltreatment, childhood trauma, and is specifically child sexual abuse, child rape. And we have to stop it. If you want to combat human trafficking, that's where we start.
I think we have to somehow figure out a way to communicate more with parents so they can directly understand what is happening here, because they have to know first before they can talk to the kids, right? I come up against a lot of, I don't want to talk about that with my kids. That's embarrassing. I said, they've already seen things by the time they're 11 years old. So you can't be embarrassed. This is, like you said, Tammy, a national crisis. And I always say, here's what I say. I try to use these simple kind of analogies with people just to get them to wake up for a second, so I can then grab them about the, harder stuff. Like, you would never take your cell phone. Well, I'll use another one. You would never open your front door and just welcome the world in, right? A bunch of strangers. Nobody would ever do that. And they all agree with me. No, we would never do that. Well, that's what it is when you hand your child a phone, a tablet. You'd never, go in the parking lot of a mall or supermarket, hold up your cell phone, say, this is my daughter. Look at her. Look at her. Nobody does that. They all agree. Okay, well, this is what's happening when you give your child a device. So we have to shock them into really taking action and becoming partners with us, because we need everybody to help us with all of this. Now, Rick, what are we facing? 2022, 2023, we keep hearing metaverses, Web 3.0, Web 3. Tell us a little bit about this. What's happening?
Happy to. It seems back in the early days, the internet was so much more simple, and now it's become more complex. But one of the things when you're talking to parents, and I would say this again back in our MySpace days, was look at you don't, I would ask a parent, do you know how a combustible engine works? And they would say, no, why? I said, well, you tell your kids don't drink and drive. That's a policy. That's what, you don't have to understand the technology. It's a policy issue, right? You're teaching your kids right from wrong, what to be aware of, stranger danger, right? All these things that we teach our kids in the offline world, we have to make sure that they understand in an online world, and then provide them the tools to help protect themselves. We're not going to save everyone. I mean, that's the first thing we have to realize. We're not going to save everyone, but we need to save as many as we can. And that is what we're trying to do with the Earn It Act, and especially as we move into this Web3, as well as the metaverse, which are two kind of separate things, to be quite honest. But the basic concept is this. The metaverse is creating worlds that are online, or AR, alternative reality, which is the glasses and you see things in different ways, but you're walking in the real world. And then you have virtual reality, VR. The VR universe is somewhat scary because you're going to have there's no rules. What's the rules for the children and going on? And I'm very concerned that without the Earn It Act, that metaverses are going to be created in such a way that kids are going to find themselves in places that they shouldn't be in. And we need to make sure that we don't allow that. We don't allow children, for instance, to go into X-rated movies, right? Or R-rated movies. And so I think we need to make sure that we begin to lay the groundwork, the public policy groundwork in the metaverse, thinking from a child safety standpoint first, instead of a profit first, which is what's happening right now. Web3 is a decentralized web. And what that basically means is that the folks, and there's a lot of pieces out there on this, but the general idea is this, that Web 2.0 created a centralized web, that you had gatekeepers like Facebook and Google and Amazon and Apple and others that were gatekeepers. And the original intent of the internet was to have basically a decentralized web where everyone can create their own websites and have competition and free flow of information, as they like to say. What Web3 does is its goal is to allow for that. Basically, you have unbreakable end-to-end encryption communications. Everyone becomes basically their own Facebook. Everyone becomes their own, Meta or Instagram or Reddit, and there's no gatekeepers to stop that. And the ultimate gatekeeper that they're trying to get around are governments, so that the governments have no role. I mean, back in the early days of the internet, there was a saying that the government has no role on the internet, that we are going to create this one world order, this online one world order, where there are no boundaries, there's no sovereignty, there's no government's involvement. And that actually was how it worked for the most part, until people started realizing that you needed to have some type of government oversight, because governments are there, not all of them, but the ones that we hope to have here in the US and continue to have in the US are there to protect individuals and individuals' freedoms and rights, but also from harm. And what's happening in the Web3 is they're trying to go back to a completely decentralized web where anything goes. And unless we start putting some type of guardrails on that, we will have even greater problems for our children and our children's safety in Web3 and in the metaverse than we're seeing today. We're going to look at today as the good old days versus what the potential future is if we do not get the public policy guardrails in place now. So as people are investing literally billions of dollars into Web3 and the metaverse, that they're building it in a way that thinks about and has as a mandate child safety first.
And I just want to remind everybody again that the Earn It Act is a bipartisan piece of legislation. It belongs to no political party. Human rights abuses, protection of children, of all people. Everybody can get on board with this. I just want Tammy for you to explain this commission. What is this commission with the Earn It Act composed of? I've had a lot of people ask me questions about who is this commission? How is this commission? Do we know how it's going to be established? What do we know about the commission?
Yes, the commission is going to establish best kind of practices or standards, but it's going to bring together key people, key players, like from the judiciary, the law enforcement community, and it's going to inform about policy. It's going to keep up with what's happening so that everybody can be educated and empowered with what's the current climate and what can we do to protect our children and those vulnerable adults as we move forward with this. So that's what it is going to do. It's going to bring about key individuals, and they are going to be chosen by the subcommittees or the committees. So that's how they're going to be kind of chosen, who are going to be the members on this commission, at least was the words that I was getting out of the key players that are introducing this legislation. And so there's going to be people on this commission that are handpicked with the best interest at heart of our community and of our world, our society. You know, we have to stop prioritizing profits over people, and that's what we're doing. And we have to stop doing that now, because we have a saying in medicine and nursing: first, do no harm. We are doing irrefutable harm, and that is contributing to so many negative impacts to our health, our economy, and such going down the road. So that's what I have to kind of say about that.
And I can just add about the commission is that the commission doesn't have binding rulemaking authority. So it's not going to be publishing and be part of the Justice Department rulemaking process. It is best practices, best recommendations. You know, it's so funny because I hear from my friends on the tech side saying, "Oh, this commission is horrible. You know, they're going to set these standards." Well, there's voluntary tech standards set every day at NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology. ICANN, sets standards, technical standards to the, IETF. And so there's all these standard setting bodies, but somehow when there's, voluntary standard setting bodies, but now all of a sudden there's voluntary standard setting body to protect children, it's, the worst thing ever. So that's one thing that's really critically important to know about the commission. The other thing to know is that this bill, Lynn, to your point, passed unanimously through the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, if anybody has watched the Senate Judiciary Committee this past year, nothing gets through, basically nothing gets through the Senate Judiciary Committee unanimously. And this legislation did. And so that's why, we're very excited about it and positive, but we do have some barriers, right? Right now, concerns are that, that the Senate may not take up the legislation until the House starts moving it. So you have, senators and leadership basically saying, well, we'll look at this, but why move it if the House is not going to move it? In the House, we do have a barrier. It's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler. And I don't like calling members out, but he is the linchpin.
I do.
Well, I do sometimes when they're wrong, like Senator Wyden. But Jerry Nadler, and you see what's happening in New York and the legislation you're working on. There's a connection to these two pieces of legislation, to what you're working on in the state of New York on the sex worker side, and this legislation, and the same groups working Nadler on both of them. And he is the person who is blocking this legislation. He, as chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, could call this legislation up for a markup tomorrow. He could hold hearings on this tomorrow. You could call for them. They would take a week because of House processes of how much time you have to have before a hearing, but they could have hearings on this. They just did an excellent hearing on sex trafficking. that was in the House Judiciary Committee, focusing on what could be done to help stem sex trafficking. And yet there's been nothing on the Earn It Act in the House Judiciary Committee, which has primary jurisdiction over this bill. So those, if we really want to move, it's the folks in New York in his congressional district, because those are the only people who can vote for him, need to go out and stand in front of his district office every day with signs asking that office why the chairman of the Judiciary Committee hasn't done anything to help protect children on a bill that was unanimously passed through the Senate Judiciary Committee. What is his rationale? Why isn't he moving this? He has the power to move this legislation. The Speaker of the House has given very broad leeway to the chairs of the committees to move legislation. And this is one that should be moved. And he's the one who has stood in the way of this legislation moving. And people need to make sure that he's aware that that is not the right public policy for his constituents and for this country.
And as soon as we're done here, sorry, Tammy, I'm marching right up to his office with my posters. Anyway, Tammy, go ahead.
And send us pictures, Lynn. So we can
Yeah.
post.
I might be there alone, but I'm doing it. I'm doing
I want pictures. You know, I'm a warrior. I'm with you.
it.
I'll come up there. You know, I think that this, a lot of times after what happened in Buffalo and has happened in other parts of the country, that we can feel powerless and we can feel like things are spiraling out of control. This piece of legislation can give you that power back. It can help because it's the same root of the evil, which is we have to control the social media platforms, the technology companies, and put safeguards in place. We're fighting the same invisible enemy in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So let's mobilize. Let's come together. Unity does not mean uniformity. We don't all have to get along, but we have to unify for the common good and to protect those that are the most vulnerable, to make America the place that we know it can be and has been this beacon of hope. And there is hope. I have overcome the darkness and I have found the light, and there is so much hope. And if we give these individuals pathways to justice, then they can become contributing members of society and to our economy instead of draining it. And they want to be. The men, the women I work with, the survivors, they're the strongest people I've met. They've overcome so much. Yes. And everything has been stacked against them. But when you give them the tools to succeed, you give them Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs, that's all they're asking for. And you believe them, they think, if these lawsuits keep getting thrown out because there's not legislation put in place, they think that society is re-victimizing them again and that we're failing them. Let's send a message that we're not going to fail victim survivors any longer, that we're not going to just talk, that we, for the first time, are going to unite and we are going to act and we are going to protect these children.
Can I just add one thing to what Tammy was saying? And this was one of the most bizarre comments I heard at the Net Choice event on why the Earn It Act is not necessary. One of the panelists said that the survivors do not want to have civil recourse because they will be traumatized again if they bring these cases. And I was like, oh, maybe there are a few who don't want to go through that again. But that doesn't mean you should stop others who want to hold entities accountable for the harm that those entities have caused them. I just thought that was the most bizarre statement, that basically they shouldn't be civil litigation because the survivors don't want it. And I'm on a call with, we have over 240 groups involved in our effort. And I think if 240 groups protecting children and groups that are helping survivors are on board, how can they make that statement? And it's just absolutely baffling to me that someone could say that. on on a call or on a panel discussion. The other thing that I also think parents need to know, sometimes, Lynn, to your earlier question, why don't people recognize this, or why aren't they getting involved? Because most people don't see it. And the reason they don't see it is the way the algorithms work on these platforms. And so, for example, in the real world, I wouldn't know where to buy drugs in my neighborhood. But I'm guessing there's probably, if I did do drugs, I bet I know a bunch of people who I could buy them from, right? Because I don't look for it. It's not part of my world. But what happens in the online world is the algorithms bring these people into a world and everyone likes to talk about that these are rabbit holes that they go down, be it the young man who was misguided and shot up the supermarket in Buffalo, or the person who is, the pedophile. What happens is they don't go down a rabbit hole, they go down a black hole. It's basically a giant gravitational pull down into the darkest corridors of the internet that are fueled by algorithms that make this happen. So, for instance, people who want to buy illegal drugs online. I have Eric Feinberg, who has done amazing research on this. He's developed his own algorithms to find all these illegal drugs on Instagram and all these different places. He's let the platforms know about it. We actually did a news article back in 2018 about this in the Washington Post, about the algorithms driving people down these pulling people down these black holes, and yet nothing has been done. So the algorithms are there that help facilitate and create more of the harm to these children than just someone just having, sending a picture to strangers, but they just bring them in. And that's part of the conduct of these websites that the Earn It Act is going to help address.
Good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Rick. Let's go back and just remind the public how they can help. I think this is very important. Again, I will say community creates change at a very grassroots level. That is the only way at the Warriors I can think making a dent in intervening and preventing. So let's review. Tammy, thoughts on how the public, you mentioned a few earlier, let's hear about it again, how the public can help.
Yes. You can find the PSA video. It's a 2.5 minute video that has embedded in it, thanks to Rick and their technology, embedded in it that lets you directly click, touch the screen with your mouse or whatever, and you can send letters to your congressional leaders just from a few touches of the button. You also can go to the National Center on Sexual Exploitation's website and look at Earn It Act, and they have ways to do that. It's also on Shared Hope International's website. There's just these, you just put in your zip code, the letter's already formulated, and it gets blasted out. We need to share this video, this PSA video, far and wide. You can find it on my Reflective Spaces Ministry website or my Nurses United Against Human Trafficking Facebook page. And you can just share it and share away. And that's what's going to help. And follow Rick's advice. And Rick is going to close us out and give that little piece of information that he wants you to do.
Okay, Rick, it's all yours. What do you have to say?
Well, I always, when I think about lobbying in Congress, I always think of, the straw that broke the camel's back. And it's never the first straw. And it's not just the last straw. It's all the straws in between. And that's what we need people to realize, that we need to have as many people, as many straws, putting pressure on Congress in order for them to take notice of this critical problem and how it can be solved through the Earn It Act. If Lynn, once this video is posted, we'll provide links within the video itself to Tammy's PSA that can be shared. We'll provide other links of information, but we need to get the word out to as many people as possible. So don't think of it as, well, the old saying, one vote matters. It does. One voice does matter. Members do care. Everyone thinks politics is about money. And that's what, the inside the Beltway lobbyists want you to think. It's not about money, or the media, because it's easier. I lost my policy vote because of the special interests on the other side and all their money. We won FOSTA 97-2 in the Senate and 400 and something to 23 in the House. We didn't have the money of Silicon Valley. We were not trillion-dollar corporations fighting for passage of this legislation. Members of Congress respond to their constituents, and those constituents need to voice their concerns and what actions they want their legislators to take. And what we're going to do through this video and through Tammy's video is provide the tools to make it easier of how to contact your member of Congress so that you too can be one of those important straws that we finally break the camel's back of the sexual exploitation that's taking place on these websites.
Tammy Toney-Butler, thank you so much. Brave, survivor, warrior, my heart. I love you so much. And Rick, my our tech policy expert, all your expertise, your shared voice, we appreciate so much. I am going to have all of your information up on the description of this video so people know all about you and all your links and websites so people can help you individually and collectively. I know that we are going to pass the Earn It Act. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.